are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Today is going to be a short show, which I will expand upon the topic probably next week. Today we're going to have a non-detailed review of the Black Panther movie, and I actually want to speak about some concepts I want you to go into the movie thinking about. So I want you to listen to this show. I'm not going to give away too many details of the show, but I want you to think about the concept. I want you to go in with your third eye open, watch the movie with these concepts in mind, and then come back and tell me if you agree or if you disagree and why. Okay, but before we get into today's show, let me give the free business shout out. Okay, once again, the free business shout out goes out to Stephanie Renee's Salon, located at 1614 West Main Street in Kalamazoo, Michigan, zip code 49006. You can contact Stephanie Renee's Salon at 269-459-6535. That's 269-459-6535. They have natural hair care products, and they're conveniently located inside Cali Beauty. That is Stephanie Renee's Salon. Please pass the word along, and remember that we give free business shout-outs every time we do a podcast. I'd like to see more people sending in their business with a short, brief description, and we'll give you a free shout-out on the show. You can email your business name, address, short description to bitter.medicine.podcast@gmail.com. That's bitter.medicine.podcast@gmail.com. Again, I would love to be able to list off numerous businesses, Black businesses, giving them a free business shout out on this podcast. And as things get become more visible where this podcast is concerned, I hope to hear more stories of business success based on these free business shout-outs. Also, Onitase from the Pro-Black Perspective podcast has this to say.
Zubiri lives in a prosperous, independent African community named the Ma'a Nation. He is a liberated man, protecting his community, participating in his local economy, and traveling the world. Along the way, he meets two liberated women, Murkia and Isad, and he has to vet both for the sake of his son, Amadi. Zubiri and the Maroons of Ma'a explores African liberation through intelligent dialogue and a realistic description of what if we protected Black Wall Street, or what if we pursued Pan-Africanism. This is the book suitable for all ages, reading levels, and occasions, and it is the perfect gift for any Black person wishing to understand manhood and womanhood from a strong Black perspective. Purchase while you still can. Peace seeker. If you seek to develop prosperous, independent African communities at home and abroad, the Pro-Black Compendium should be your next purchase. No other book offers as complete a study on you. Your ancestors urged you to know yourself. The Pro-Black Compendium informs you on you, your ancestors' enemies, your enemies, and what you can do today to live free. Purchase today while you still can.
Yes, indeed. That's Only Tassay from the Pro-Black Perspective podcast on KWAZ Radio, one of our sister shows. Please support the brother and check out his recent podcast. Getting into today's topic, we're talking about a non-detailed, mostly non-spoilery review of the movie Black Panther. First, to begin with, let's talk about something I've been seeing on social media a lot in preparation for the release of this movie. A lot of you black folks suffering from insomnia, where you're too awake, have been talking about how attending and supporting the Black Panther movie is just putting a lot more money in white people's pockets. And while that is true, I would like to point out to all of you who are doing that on social media, you're typing that criticism on a white man's platform. If you go to work, you're probably going to work for a white man. You are taking the public transportation owned by white people. You're driving a car that you bought 9 times out of 10 from a white person and it's owned by some white, or maybe I should say Eurasian, company. So miss me with the holier-than-thou talk about supporting a Marvel movie called Black Panther. Until we have our own things, let's enjoy seeing let's enjoy the value of seeing positive images of black people in film. Because the truth of the matter is, Black Panther is largely a black film with black people behind the scenes working on it. It's not just some white guys behind the scene working on it, but there's some black folks, from what I understand, behind the scenes. Short Collin, the director and co-writer of the film, is black. I don't know the identity of the other writer. You look at the film, it's 98%, maybe even 99% black. So that's a lot of black actors getting work. That's a lot of black people on the sets, designing the costumes and stuff like that. So there's some relevance there. And if done right, if done well, it can boost the consciousness among creatives, and help creatives strive to make more black films on their rules and within their own ownership. So we can't shit on something and say, well, you're just giving back money to white folks. We give back money to white folks every day. $1 stays in our community for 6 hours. Do I want that to change? Of course I want it to change. But let's celebrate and recognize the value in seeing ourselves in a positive light. I mean, none of these sleep-deprived, overwoke black folks are complaining that heavily about slave movies that come out every couple of years. There's some slave narrative. And black folks going to watch that shit. Or some Butler-type narrative where it's just a black man being shit on his whole life. And those things win awards because we support it too. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, that it's okay. Go and see Black Panther, support it. But don't just support it just to support it. But support it with an eye on, yes, this can help our up-and-coming or our current filmmakers and documentarians, etc., to do black films that excite people's consciousness when it comes to blackness and Africa. You could do that, but just do it on your own terms. Own the rights to what you're doing. And we could get black support behind it. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about some themes in the movie that I think people should really pay attention to, should listen to this podcast, hear this, and go into that movie and then come back and tell me in the comment section, what do you think about what I had to say about the movie in this non-spoilery review. So let's begin with the two really main locations of the movie. I think Japan, I believe, was a location, but it wasn't a main location. The two main locations in the movie is Oakland in the United States and Wakanda, the fictional country within the continent of Africa. Now, Ryan Coogler, the director, is from Oakland. And it seems like he likes to give props to his hometown whenever he can in his films. And so they show you a little slice of the Black American experience in America by way of Oakland. On the other side, they show you Wakanda, an albeit fictional location in the continent of Africa, but a kind of representation of Africa as a whole. When you break down the Wakanda that they show you in the film, it touches on certain things I've talked about in the past on this podcast. Wakanda is a STEM-centered, economically centered, and successful country in Africa. Now, a few weeks ago, I told you guys about the importance of STEM education as far as the black community is concerned and how it could boost the economy, the black economy. And Wakanda is kind of that representation of it. And you see it in the film. Wakanda is so advanced scientifically that they have this super stable economy while maintaining their African culture. And Wakanda is so economically and scientifically successful, they had to devise a plan to hide themselves away from Europeans. See, people might miss that, thinking that they were hiding from other Africans. No, they were hiding from Europeans. Because, and I've heard some people say that King T'Challa and those guys from Wakanda didn't understand white supremacy. I disagree. They understood white supremacy so fundamentally that they hid away from European eyes. They were aware of the atrocities that befell, places like Black Wall Street and the versions of Black Wall Street that popped up in 24 different places in America. They were aware that the Europeans will come in and destroy that shit. Take its resources, kill the people, and or just simply destroy it. So they hid themselves away. The problem with them hiding themselves away is that they only fought when necessary. Even in the face of other people from the continent, of people of Africa, being kidnapped, tortured, murdered, raped, abused, dehumanized. They didn't get into those battles. And so some people, some friends of mine, are not calling them Wakandan, they're calling them Wakundan. Were they Wakandan coons? That's something you should look at when you watch the film and decide for yourself. But overall, the movie looks at Africans versus African American. They don't really touch on African Caribbeans. Maybe African Caribbeans are lumped in with Africa. But it's primarily looking at African civilization versus African American civilization and experience. There is a little bit of a Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King type thing going on, where King T'Challa, pun intended, is Martin Luther King. And Michael B. Jordan's character, Killmonger, is somewhat a Malcolm X character. And I believe a lot of people will watch the film within that paradigm. Oh, this is Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. I see it a little bit differently. While I do recognize there's some character sketches of those two men, MLK, Malcolm X, within the two main characters in the film, Eric Killmonger and King T'Challa, or Black Panther, I don't think it's it's all about that. I really don't think it's all about that. What I think the show is really about, it's about black nationalism versus Pan-Africanism. I'm going to talk about that for the majority of this this short show. That's what I'm going to really be talking about. King T'Challa and Wakanda represents black nationalism. Eric Killmonger, who is from Oakland in the United States, he represents Pan-Africanism. And so they touch on a lot of the tenets of black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. They also touch on some of the criticisms of each. And they do a cool thing. This is how you know when a director has their ear to the ground. They incorporate some of the things you hear from the conscious community today, like buying the block. There's a scene in the movie where T'Challa essentially buys the block, takes an area that's in economic deprivation, and he buys the block. I'm not going to give away where this happens in the movie and who's involved, but that's what he does. He buys the block. And that's something you hear all the time in, the black community. We always talking about, instead of getting fame while you were living in the hood and just taking your ma out of the hood, why not go back and buy the block? That's more beneficial to everyone, right? To go back and buy the block and build the block up, and the gentrification that goes on where poorer blacks are pushed out of their areas that they've inhabited for generations, all because white people come and say, I want it, and that's it. All because white people are organized in a way where they can systematically come in and push you out. But the Eric Killmonger is like Malcolm X in the sense that he believes in by any means necessary. He doesn't say it, but you see from his actions, he believes in it. And he's Pan-African in that he's not just thinking about Wakanda. In fact, he criticizes Wakanda and the fact that Wakanda doesn't enter into fights to protect all of African people around the globe. That's what he wants to do. So that's the other thing that they're doing in this movie. They're pushing Killmonger, who I said is akin to a Malcolm X, they're pushing Killmonger to be the villain. But I'm just going to tell you, to me, Killmonger is the anti-hero. And in fact, I feel Killmonger is the king that you really wanted, not T'Challa. But let's talk about what what black nationalism is versus Pan-Africanism. In fact, let's take a station ID break, and on the other side, I'll break that down with respect to the movie as well.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We're here today having a brief show, a non-spoilery review of the recently released, the just released Black Panther movie from Marvel Comics. And we're talking about what the movie is really talking about in a larger sense. A lot of people will look at it and think it's about Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. And while I agree there is some of that going on in the movie, I think to a larger extent the movie is talking about black nationalism versus Pan-Africanist thought. The main characters, who is King T'Challa, does have a lot of MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. to him. The antagonist, who I prefer to look at as an anti-hero, but a hero nonetheless, he has a lot of kind of a Malcolm X militancy, by any means necessary kind of way about him, but he's fundamentally Pan-African. His critique, Killmonger's critique of Wakanda, and this is not a spoiler, you could get a sense of this from the trailers, but his critique of Wakanda is that Wakanda, for all its might, for all its for all its astute business style and its for all its scientific achievement, it has not entered into the fight for all black people around the globe. For all its resources, for all its money, for all its weaponry, quite frankly, it has not entered the fight for black folks around the globe. It's just left everyone else who's black outside of Wakanda, it's just left them to their own devices, their own fate. Which is a good critique. And some Africans in slavery probably thought the same about the continent during slavery. Why haven't you come out here and helped us and help us? So that sets it up. The nationalists, black nationalists versus the Pan-Africanists. But what are these things that I'm talking about? We've talked about this before on the show, but let me talk about it again within the context of this film. In black nationalism, all black nationalist ideologies are centered around unity and self-determination or independence from European society. But with the black nationalists, there's something about it that's a little bit more specific. The black nationalists believe in right here. In other words, black nationalism emphasizes independence from white society wherever we are. So if we're in America, the black nationalist believes in having the white government of America give you land and a space to dwell and to thrive and, you know, basically self-govern yourself. Now, we know from previous examples that's not really going to happen. White America, with the assistance of the government, will destroy anything you build for your own. So the black nationalist is about wherever you are, right here, versus the Pan-African, who's about unity with everyone over there. You see the difference? One group deals with the unity, the independence of wherever you are, the unity and independence in the geographic location that you happen to be, and worry about nothing else. It's black nationalism is heavily based on pride. And that's what you see with the Wakandans in the Black Panther movie. The Wakandans are black nationalists. They emphasize that independence from white society in Wakanda. And they have a pride for being Wakandan, etc. It's about right here for the Wakandans. They don't care about everywhere else. Killmonger, who's a black American with roots from Wakanda, Killmonger is more so a Pan-Africanist. He wants to unify not only with right here, but over there too. Now, when y'all watch the movie, I want y'all to look out for that. Look out for that fundamental difference between the kings of Wakanda, who only really cared about Wakanda, and what Eric Killmonger is about when he's really about empowering Africans globally. He's about empowering Africans globally, and he's very much aware of what happened to Africans during slavery, what Wakandans did or didn't do during slavery. He's well aware of it. So he's a Pan-Africanist who the movie is trying to tell you, don't like him. He's a villain. I want y'all to watch that. Don't like him. He's a villain. The villain is the guy who wants to empower, the black man, who wants to empower Africans globally. The hero is the guy who's kind of all for me, all for self, all for the people around him in this one geographic area, and let everyone else kind of deal with their issues alone. So in a sense, if Killmonger represents black Americans, they're kind of telling you that black Americans or blacks in America are the anti-hero. The ones you shouldn't like. You understand? The ones who are really pushing love for the people everywhere don't like that. They are villains. Don't like them. Like the black folks who say the right things about being independent and self-determined, etc., but who do it for themselves and the people around them. You must like those guys more. Very, very deep type of thing. The thing about black nationalism has in it, fundamentally, even though it stresses the need to separate and build separate communities that promote strong racial pride and which collectivizes resources and stuff like that. But there is something about black nationalism that has a little bit of that integrationist spirit, that integrationist mentality about it. And so in the film, and you could see this in the previews for the film. This is not a spoiler. There's a white guy, Everett Ross, who was in the Captain America Civil War film, where Black Panther also debuted. But Ross is a little bit of a white hero. They had very little problems under the circumstances. Again, not trying to spoil anything, but they had very little problems taking Ross back to Wakanda. And actually listening to some of his suggestions, and there's a part of the film where he's heroic. So that's that kind of black nationalist thing where, you know, even though it pushes race identity and race pride and self-sufficiency and self-determination, it does have a little bit of that integrationist thinking, but it's supposed to be like an integrationist thinking where you don't lose your identity. So you could live amongst white folks, you can have your black first, race identity first, pride about you. You could be self-sufficient and independent from white people, self-determined, but you can still be among them. Just, you don't lose your identity. And to be honest, the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, those groups are black nationalist groups in America that have that kind of mentality. If you've listened to Farrakhan over the years, Farrakhan has talked about being able to buy land or to be given land in an area where black folks can all go into this one area in America. And then I think they expanded it to like 5 states or something like that in America down in the South. This is what the Nation of Islam was trying to do. Get about 5 or 6 states down towards the South and let that be the black man's paradise. But it would require the white man to give you the land, to give you the go-ahead to do it. And the limitation on that is that we've seen white rage when there's black prosperity. We've seen white rage just destroy black progress in that way. But there's definitely a sense of Wakanda kind of merging with, you know, kind of being integrationist in that way. You know, the problem with black nationalism, though, is when you merge with, say, overall mainstream America, right? Let's say you practice black nationalism in America. Ultimately, you want to merge overall with mainstream America. And it's the multiculturalism that dilutes your identity, that helps you lose your African identity over time. And that's just a main criticism of black nationalism, that multiculturalism will ultimately destroy your black first, race first identity. Which is kind of where, at the end of the film, Wakanda's kind of heading into that direction. Again, no spoilers being given. But at the end of the movie, they start to do some initiatives that will make them more accessible, it seems, to the Western world. So the movie is kind of conditioning your brain to be kind of an MLK integrationist, to be a black nationalist. So that's where the blackness comes from. The blackness comes from, yeah, be black, be proud, be self-determined, be independent, but do it in a group wherever you are, and don't really care about the other groups out there. So to me, that has a message for Black Americans, that has a message for Black Caribbeans, that has a message for Black people from the continent of Africa. Y'all do your thing, localized, right? Do your thing localized, and whatever little groups you want to splinter off into. You know, if you want to be Morris Science, you want to be the Wapian, you want to be NOI, that's cool. Do that. But don't do what Killmonger wants, which is spread the love out across all Africans, all Black people everywhere. Empower all Black people everywhere and turn the tables. And that's something that the Wakandans didn't really want to do. They didn't really want to turn the tables. They claimed that it would be like being like white people. Well, hell, what's the point of you being technologically advanced, economically stable, race first, Black pride, but you aren't willing to help your fellow man who's out there in the world, who's suffering, who's being oppressed, and you have the tools to free him from that oppression? So that takes me into talking about Pan-Africanism. You know. But one last point about Wakanda in the film, as far as Wakanda being a Black nationalist representation. Remember I said that Black nationalism, its basic tenets are race identity, race pride, self-sufficiency, and self-determination. But there are issues with that too when you look at it from a nationalist standpoint. The issues that come with that is, well, there's race pride, and there's also we're the best. And you kind of see that with King T'Chaka, King T'Challa's father, who was an old man in Captain America Civil War, and who died in that film. Spoilers, if you haven't seen that film yet, that came out a couple years ago. But when they showed young T'Chaka, he had an air about him as, we are the best. And that's one of the issues with Black nationalism. You take race pride to a point where you start to think, well, we are the best. Our little niche group over here is the best. Black nationalism isn't affixed to the idea of being separate so much. Like I said, they have a little integrationist spirit about them. So they have this togetherness with other races while trying to maintain your racial identity and your racial pride first. But let's mix with everyone else, not realizing that just that alone, that multiculturalism, means you're going to lose your culture. And the last issue with Black nationalism is that it's about individual, not group goals. So you could brag about Wakanda being technologically advanced and this, that, and the other, and, even greater than Western powers and stuff like that. But you're talking about that as an individual, as a Wakandan, not as the larger group of being Black people. So those are, some of the issues I see with Wakanda and its representation of black nationalism. It mirrors the basic tenets of black nationalism, and it also mirrors the basic issues I have with black nationalism. On the flip side of black nationalism, you have Pan-Africanism, which, as I stated before, is represented by the black American Eric Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan in the film, who does a great job, by the way. By the way, the film is a great film. When you talk about its presentation of Afrofuturism, it's a great film. The caliber of acting is good. It looked real good to see all those black people, real melanated people on film. I like that it addresses, in a nice little covert way, it addresses black nationalism versus Pan-Africanism, because it gives us something to think about, something to talk about, in terms of which tenets of either movement makes more sense ultimately. But Eric Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, he is the villain of the film, really. There's a white villain as well, but really he's the villain of the film. But I'm here to tell you, going into that movie, if you haven't seen it yet, or if you even have seen it yet, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Killmonger is actually the anti-hero. And by anti-hero, that just means that he's a hero, but he doesn't do it in the model hero way of doing things. On the surface, he looks like a villain. But when you look deeper, his actions are actually well-meant and heroic. And he, like I said, represents Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is a movement that seeks to unify African people or people living in Africa or around the world into one African community. So it's not just about unifying the nations in Africa, but it's about unifying and protecting the people of African descent around the world. Pan-African seeks, economic, social, and political unity. Now, if you think about that, that's exactly what Marcus Garvey was trying to do. Connect the blacks in America with blacks in the Caribbean, with blacks people in Africa. He was trying to initiate trade routes through the Black Star Line. So he was putting in work to connect us across the globe. And that's what Pan-African is. And that's what Killmonger wants to do in this film. He wants to connect, protect, and empower black folks around the globe. And he understands that the benefits of this kind of cooperation is the best way to resist the imperialism and the colonialism carried out by Europeans or Eurasian folks. And if you can't tell, I'll state it clearly. Killmonger is my favorite character in the film, more so than the Black Panther himself. I would even go as far as to say Killmonger is the best villain in the whole Marvel universe. Best in terms of how the character was acted. Best in terms of how I could relate to the character. He's the best villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hands down. So, again, the movie touches on Pan-Africanism by showing you some of the issues that you find covered in Pan-Africanism. Is race and nation the same or different? The movie touches on this. Is race and nation the same or different? And I have to say, in the movie, they separate the two. Nation was more important to the Wakandans than race. Let me repeat that again. Nation was more important to Wakandans than race. Because again, they refused to enter into the fight. They preferred to hide away and bask in their own glory. And Eric Killmonger is the one who kind of points this out, who illustrates this issue. Killmonger was really pushing, not just for Wakanda, but just Africa in general, to become this kind of continental superstate. A continental superstate that through its power alone empowered all peoples of African descent. And the Killmonger character was well aware of the diaspora. Well aware. I mean, let me tell you something. When you really look at the Killmonger character, and you put aside this notion that he was supposed to be some villain, you will love the Killmonger character because he understands the diaspora. He understands that there's separate entities. There's a lot of survivalist communities. But he recognized that we need to have the same ideology to get the oppressor up off of us by any means necessary. And the character himself is in a funny middle space position in that he fundamentally understands the cultural difference between Africans and Africans abroad. But he shows you how easy, how probably, I guess you could say, how natural it is for him to operate as a African from the continent, even though he's an African from America. So like I said before, I didn't plan to make this a long show. I would like to actually do a top 10. I think I'm going to have a good friend of mine's on very soon to discuss a top 10, top 10 things from the movie. So that's going to be a spoilery review. But I want to point out the two main topics of contention in this film. And I think it is wonderfully done. I think some of the things that you hear in the conscious community that's represented in the film, like buying the block, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I think is important. And I think it hopefully people pay attention to it. But I want people to pay attention to the Killmonger character because I think he is the king that we really want. Okay? He is the king that we really want. They play him as a villain. At best, they play him as an anti-hero. But he is the person to keep an eye on and to keep an eye on his ideologies and to keep an eye on his understanding of the dynamics of a diaspora and how we need a super state in Africa to empower and protect Africans around the globe. At one point in the movie, Killmonger is talking about if he were to die. Okay? At one point in the movie, he talks about if he were to die, what he would want at his death. And this isn't very spoilery. You're probably going to see this meme floating around on social media starting today, maybe even starting from yesterday. But when he was talking about if he were to die, he said, this is Eric Killmonger, who's the villain of the film, who I call really the king that you want to have, the anti-hero. He says, "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage." I think that's one of the dopest lines I've heard in a black film. Do you agree or disagree? Hear it again. "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage." And that is a mentality a lot of us black folks need to adopt. I heard a coon on his radio show, YouTube platform. I won't call his name here, but you probably have an idea who's the king of coons on YouTube. He said that black folks were stupid because they should have just allowed themselves to die. And once they allowed themselves to die, slavery couldn't continue because it was a business. And if the product keeps dying, killing themselves or allowing themselves to die, they would have to stop doing it. The Africans who were stolen from Africa and made slaves in America really didn't know or understand their condition until it was too late. And that's just true of anyone, of any group of people, really. Some of them on the ships understood, oh, this ain't gonna be good. And they jumped overboard. And I appreciate them. But I also have to appreciate the ones who didn't do so, because you or I wouldn't be here had they done the same thing as those folks who jumped off of the ships. But at the same time now, we've had enough time to understand our predicament. We've had enough time to understand our situation and to understand what sacrifice or sacrifices we might need to make going forward. And I think the hero in my books of the movie, Eric Killmonger, said it best in that quote: "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage." Family, we're coming to a time now where we got to prepare ourselves. We have to prepare our children and their children that if bondage is the choice, or if bondage is the directive being aimed towards you, that we just have to give it up. We have to die. We can't go through this bondage thing again. I'll tell you why, too. Because in the time that Africans were stolen from Africa and brought to the Americas to become slaves, chattel slaves at that. The technology has gotten better in the world. If you were afraid of guns in slavery, you'll be really afraid now with the kind of guns they have out here now. If you thought the system in slavery was difficult to overcome, the new era slavery that they seem to be pushing to bring back and make America great again, that's 10 times worse. So you have to be prepared to be buried in the ocean with your ancestors who jumped off of those ships. Than to live a life in bondage. So, with that said, like I said, I was going to make this a quick show. I want you guys in the comment section to tell me your thoughts. What are your overall thoughts of the movie? What did you think of the characters T'Challa, the Black Panther, versus the so-called enemy, Eric Killmonger? Do you think they represented Malcolm X and MLK and the civil rights movement? Or do you think they really represented black conscious ideologies of black nationalism versus Pan-Africanism? And if you see that, if you see what I'm saying when you watch the film, let me know which ideology you think made more sense based on what you saw visually. Which ideology was the better? And my last question is, were the people of Wakanda Wakandans? Or Wakandans? Were they Wakandan coons? So, once again, thank you for tuning in to this show. I plan to do a spoilery review. I'm going to let this weekend pass first, and probably next week or the middle of the coming week, I'll do a actual review of the top 10 things. I think I'll have a special guest on for that. But yeah, make sure go out and support. Don't listen to these folks who are telling you not to enjoy the film because you're giving money back to white folks. Everything you do under the current system gives money back to white folks. We need to be working to stop that. And some of us are. And we got to get everyone on board. But in the meantime, we can enjoy a film that shows us in a positive light, not just as a slave or some degenerate in the hood, some thug. Okay? So, again, let me know your comments below. And thank you for listening to another edition of the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.